All right, and we are back for our last video of this class. Just an aside, we talked about brownfields before. So these are these properties that are environmentally unfriendly and in urban. You think of like the empty lot in an urban area. So it's but it's not Superfund qualified. So the a lot of states have these brownfields programs, having loans to get people to redevelop these lands um, and so it's kind of like low interest or no interest loans to get companies and people to develop these areas. Um, clean them up and develop them. So, think about like an old gas station or things like that. So that's brownfields programs. TSCA, we're going to talk about more in next class. So that allows the EPA to deal with toxic chemicals. That's the cradle to grave statute. Okay, so the next one next statute we're talking about is EPCRA, which was created in the Sarah amendments. So that's why I had you watch that fun office video. Some quotes, be prepared. And I'd be a dumbass if I didn't plan for every contingency. Okay, so that's what EPCRA is about, right? Being prepared beforehand uh, so that in the event something bad happens, uh, your community is ready to deal with it. Okay, so it's really local and state plans for if anywhere there are hazardous chemicals at facilities in those areas. Okay, um, it was inspired by the Bhopal disaster, and there was also a West Virginia chemical release in 1985. I guess I will attach some articles in the module about Bhopal and just terrible things that happen, chemical releases, and then nobody knew what what was happening. So the hospitals and first responders, they didn't know how to deal with it. So a lot of people died. It was just terrible. So now we have this EPCRA. Okay, so it's not. It's more local, more interested in citizens and being informed of hazards in their community. So, planning, the rights of community, people who live in a community to know about things, procedures, um, protecting first responders and giving first responders information on how to properly respond when there is an emergency, some sort of toxic release, and then also for residents to protect them. So it's not an after the fact, and it's not a limiting. It's just like, if bad things happen, are we prepared? What is how can we help the community and the first responders? So the first responders will know what to expect and how to either fix it or treat injuries. Right? Okay, so that's that office video. Funny stuff. Okay, so this is, it's a federal statute, but it requires the states and local communities to come up with plans. Okay, so the governor of whatever state appoints what we call the State Emergency Response Commission. Okay, and then they divvy up a state into emergency planning districts, and this state commission also monitors whether these districts are complying with EPCRA, and then it appoints for each district what we call an LEPC, Local Emergency Planning Committee. Okay, so the state one is the CERC, The local one is the LEPC. Okay, so this is just like our Illinois one, our State Emergency Response Commission. Okay, so just if you ever want to check this out, that is the website. All right, so they have their reporting require links here too on that site, which we'll talk about in a second. Okay, so CERC, the state commission, gets information from all your facilities that either produce, store, or use hazardous substances. Okay, and that becomes your list of extremely hazardous substances, or EHS, extremely hazardous substances. Okay, and then we have to they figure out what the amount of threshold, we call it threshold planning quantity, TPQ. Okay, so if anything above that TPQ is present, then we have to do, we're going to call that an emergency situation, and these emergency planning requirements have to start. So there's, okay, how many, what do we have, what are they, what's an appropriate level in each site, and what level, if it goes beyond, do we have to plan for? Okay, their monitors, we want to figure out at what level these hazardous substances endanger either human health or the environment. Okay, and then so each facility has to, have their Dwight. Okay, they have to name a coordinator to help them fulfill what they have to do for this emergency planning. Okay, so your LEPC for wherever your facility is located, that LEPC creates these emergency response plans for each facility, in conjunction with that, your coordinator. Okay, so the facilities have to report. There's different levels of reporting that they have to report. If we go beyond that TPQ, they have routes within their district that are used to transport these hazardous substances. So then, like, the communities within these routes know about it. That was one of those things that recent train disaster in Ohio, like, these chemicals were not supposed to be in that level, that quantity on that train. They were violating these TPQs. Anyhow, so then for each of these, and then so wherever they're going through, like, what are all risk related facilities? Okay, so if you have a chemical facility right next, and then maybe you have like natural gas lines. Where are all the hospitals? Where are the schools? Where are the power plants? Where is the water treatment plant? Right. So it's like, oh, is this going to get into the water? Is this going to, like, cause the power to go out? Is this going to cause an explosion with the gas line or something like that? Where are our hospitals? Where are our kids? Things like that. Okay. And then for each of these EHSs, they have to have, give information for how an emergency responder should respond, right? So, if you have a grease fire in your kitchen, you don't put water on it, right? You've got to put like flour or baking soda, or just like put deprive it of oxygen. You can't put water on it because that'll make it go higher, right? So for different chemicals, what do you do? Sometimes, putting water on something would be bad. So description. So how do the first responders, how do the firefighters put out this fire? Or how does this doctor treat this burn? Okay, and then we have for each district, there are emergency response coordinators. There are procedures put into place. Okay, like what do we do if there's a chemical release in the air? Where do we evacuate? What level of evacuation? How many people, or if it's something goes into the water, is it a boil order or is it like you can't use the water? What is how do we notify the people of what to do and how to do it? Um, how do we figure out if there's a release? Is there, and what is the zone of danger? How far out do we have to evacuate? What's the risk to human life or human health? Then we have all of the, who are our firefighters, who are our, uh, you know, I don't know, people who can work on the power lines, right? Where's our equipment? Where's our PPE? All that stuff within the community. So it's all like list and where it is located is tracked as well. And then there is a training program, and then the schedule for mock drills. So it's really like locally, what do we do? Okay, so where are all our resources? Are our people trained? How do we protect the people? How do we notify the community in the event that something bad happens? So if there is an emergency release, right? So something, a hazardous substance that exceeds that, our reportable quantity, and there's some exposure to people off that site, right? Okay, so that's a release. Um, what are the hazardous substances? Well, there's a list of hazardous substances in the CFR. There's the CERCLA list, and then again, reportable quantity, whichever that is for that certain substance. Okay, so if this happens in your facility, that owner or operator has to notify whoever the LEP, that local emergency response coordinator. Okay, so what is the procedure? There might be a procedure. Do they call? Do they get on a radio? Do they have to like go over there? Um, so they also, you can call 911 first, right? You can call but then you also pretty quickly have to call the LEPC emergency response coordinator, because if it is something that affects the whole community, they have to start working. If it's CERCLA, they might also have, if it's a CERCLA substance, they might also have to call that NRC, the National Response Center. And so the motivate, it's like where did it happen, how much, what's the exposure. They have to give all that information if it happens. Um, After that, so that has to be pretty much instantaneous right away. And then they follow up with written notification. And with the written notification, you'll also say what you've done. And you give that to both the LEPC, so the local, and the state emergency response commission. Okay, so if it's a transportation, um, there's different notification requirements. So there, you start out with a 911 call. Um, this is kind of like that Ohio one. There was also in here a couple of years ago. If you want to look at that article, in Kenosha, there was ammonia leak, and people who inhaled that went into the hospital. So things like that. So if it's the Ohio train, a truck carrying some of these hazardous substances has a different notification requirement. Okay, so there's an emergency release. So sometimes there are continuous releases that we know about. So either happens all the time or we have to do it periodically, part of normal operations. So if your continuous release is stable, um, and we know when know to expect it, then your reporting requirements are reduced. Um, but if you're doing this, you have to tell the NRC, the local, and the state emergency response commission, um, and it would be different. So you'd say, well, there's information that you have to give. There's forms, there's record keeping. All of that has to be made available to the EPA. Okay, so that's like the emergency stuff, right? So basically, through the state and your local area, every facility has to notify their region of what they have and in what quantities. And if something unexpected happens, they have to contact the the emergency response coordinator locally and the state person, of course, and contact 911. So the facilities also have to give to your local and state commissions and the local fire department a list of all the hazardous chemicals that have at the facility. Okay, you need the name and then what is its category, right? Is it is it a something that you can't breathe? Is it something it's a corrosive? Is it you know going to make you pass out? What is the immediate hazard of it? Is it going to go on fire? Delayed health hazard, right? So uh, later on, you might get cancer from this. Um, Fire hazard, of course, sudden release of pressure hazard, poof, or reactive hazard. So if something, some chemical comes in contact with something else, explosion. Okay, so what are those? What's the category of it? Why is it hazardous? And so they have to notify the firefighters what it is and the local and state emergency commissions. Then that is also available. That information is also available to the public. Yeah, so they're and there's also something called a material safety data sheet, which has information about all those chemicals and how to proper care and handling and things like that. If it is a mixture, so it has one chemical and something else, the threshold quantity is the whole mixture. Okay, so there's levels of reporting. Tier 1 reporting, a facility owner has to, give the LEPC and the SCRC how, the quantity of these chemicals in each category present at the facility from last year, the daily quantity, and the location. Okay, and that again is available to the public so the public knows what's there. And then they have to give the location, they give that information to the first responders, but they might always, yeah. So this is what I'm talking about here. The tier 2 reporting is more about like the location at the chemical facility too, um, and this confidential location sheet, so that it's not available to the public because sometimes they might not want the public to know where it is. To avoid things like theft or terrorism. If you tell them specifically where the site is and then somebody goes in and gets it released to hurt the community. Okay, so that's sometimes that tier 2 stuff is confidential. um, there is also toxic chemical release reporting for larger facilities, and again these toxic chemicals are on the EP list found in the under EPCRA regulations and the Code of Federal Regulations. They update it because we learn about new chemicals all the time. Any releases have to be reported annually, and things that are exempt from this reporting would be, routine maintenance or I guess personal use vehicle maintenance too. And if you only have to report when this threshold level is met, and sometimes you might have to notify customers that there's toxic chemicals in their products too. Okay, and there's a toxic chemical inventory reporting form. So we have tier 1, tier 2, and then that toxic one. In 1993, there's an executive order that actually requires federal facilities to also comply with EPCRA. And federal agencies have to come up with their agency-wide pollution prevention strategy. And so these are, just if you have a federal facility in your community, they're subject to the same EPCRA requirements. This goes along with that, what I was talking to, that the confidential stuff. If there are, the Coca-Cola formula or something, the trade secret stuff can be held confidential by that. Not the specific chemical components might not be made available to the public. So the EPA determines whether or not a trade secret applies. You can claim it, but whatever. If there's no trade secret, then the components are made public as well. Enforcement, traditional stuff, right? Those administrative orders, potential criminal liability for violating it, and civil fines. The state, local, the EPA, or citizens can bring lawsuits. And even if you don't know about it, right? So, like when EPCRA was first enacted, maybe some facilities didn't know about the law, but they still upheld fines. Even so ignorance of EPCRA is not an excuse. So that's it. Take a look at some of that Bhopal stuff, and take the quiz and finish up the other assignments. And I will chat with you next week.